lot of people know this experiment because they parodied it a bit in Ghostbusters. The idea of the experiment is...
Oh, like at the beginning?
Yes, like in the beginning, where you got a dude who's... It's kind
he's
of
hooked to
he's hooked to an
electrodes.
electrode. But in this experiment, the person that's hooked to the electrode is in another room that you can't see, but you can hear.
Oh, I've
And
seen this.
He's an actor. He wasn't really doing it. And they
They
brought in
filmed this.
test subjects. Yes, they filmed it. They brought in test subjects, and the test subjects were told like the experiment was about discipline and punishment, behavioral punishment. So they would ask them questions, and if they got the simple questions, and if they got the questions
shock
wrong,
'em.
the person who was not the doctor,
Yeah.
but the volunteers who'd come in would have to press a button, knowing that the dude in the other room would get a shock, and it would go up 15 volts every time. Every time they had to press the buzzer. Like, you get one wrong, you start at a certain amount of voltage.
Yeah.
You get the next one wrong, it goes up. So the experiment to the person, the volunteer, was like all about how long will it take, I guess, for this dude to fucking start getting shit right because I keep shocking him. But the real experiment, which they didn't tell the volunteers, was
Who would just be like,
how far will people follow orders in when confronted with an authority figure of somewhat. Now, mind you, these are volunteers. These aren't like
yeah.
these are just
Footage
cats
is
who came in.
fascinating.
It's
footage is fucking fascinating.
It's bizarre, and then it gets even more bizarre later on. So what happens is they get a bunch of people coming in, and everyone will do it.
Yeah.
And the voltage goes up, and the dude in the other room, who they can't see, is acting like he's
You can
in
hear it.
absolute agony, screeching. And then it'll go to the point where they start asking questions like, "Are you sure that guy's all right?" And he's like, "We have to keep the experiment going, so please keep going." They took the experiment all the way to the point where the screeching in the other room stops completely.
Like he's dead.
Yes. And they would still continue to press that fucking button.
It's fucked up.
And
I've seen the footage.
researchers concluded at the end of it that I would say, on the basis of having observed 1,000 people in the experiment and having my own intuition shaped and informed by these experiments, that if a system of death camps were set up in the U.S. of the sort we'd seen in Nazi Germany, one would be able to find sufficient personnel for these camps in any medium-sized American town. Follow-up to that experiment, years later, is called Shock the Puppy. And what they did was, they were like, look, in that experiment, you can't see.
Michael Vick was on.
Yeah, pretty much. Michael Vick was the
Volunteer
guy.
for that.
He was like, I'm in. Who do I got to fucking hit? And spank and kill. What they decided was, since the people couldn't see the person they were hurting, perhaps it would be different if they could see the victim. And what more harmless and tough to electrocute victim than a small puppy, a cute, fluffy puppy, they said.
There you go.
So they told their subjects, volunteers from an undergraduate psychology course, that the puppy was being trained to distinguish between a flickering and a steady light. It had to stand either to the right or the left, depending on the cue from the light. If the animal failed to stand in the correct place, the subjects had to press a switch to shock it. And as in the other experiment, the Milgram experiment it's called, the shock levels increased 15 volts for every wrong answer. But unlike the Milgram experiment, the puppy was really getting fucking zapped. As the voltage increased, the puppy first barked, then jumped up and down, and get ready because it gets pretty fucking sad. And then finally started howling with pain. Now, the volunteers were horrified. They paced back and forth, hyperventilated, gestured with their hands to show the puppy where to stand. So they're standing in front of the cage going, "Over here! Please, please, go over here, please!"
Never mind me stopping this atrocity.
Yes! Rather than like, "Look, I ain't gonna do it," they're like, "I gotta teach this fucking dog, man!" Many openly wept, yet the majority of them, 20 out of 26, kept pushing the shock button right up to the maximum voltage. They don't say whether the puppy died or not. Intriguingly, the 6 students who refused to go on with the experiment were all men. All 13 women who participated in the experiment obeyed right up until the end. That is, how weird is that? You'd imagine like a dude would be more like, "Hey man, fucking roasting puppies is cool and metal."
Awesome.
Totally. And you'd imagine chicks would be like, the maternal instinct kick in. I don't want to hurt the puppy. But the chicks kept doing it. And I asked Schwabach, I was like, what the fuck's that all about? She's like, was the doctor a man? I said, yeah. And she's like, well, it just tells you about conditioning in our society where, like, you know, people, women especially, will see a man in a doctor's coat as an authority figure, and very few will actually want to say no in that instance because we're just indoctrinated to believe that men are always. I mean, she went on a feminist tear about it, and I was just like, let's talk about the shock puppy. Is that fucked up?
I mean, my response to that is also one of, like, if somebody came up to me and was like, okay, if it doesn't do it, you'll shock it. I'll be like, okay, I'm not going to do it at all. I'm not going to do it.
That's
I'm
when
just
I
like,
leave.
I think
I'm
you're
like,
fucked up.
Look, you can keep the $5. I'm fucking out of here.
Yeah.
I don't even know if they were paid. Probably not, because they were from an undergraduate psychology course. So they're probably doing it maybe for credit.
I would basically be like, I would say, like, if you put like, because I've felt shock collars. If I was like, well, if you let me feel how the dosage, the wattage, and as high as it gets, and then I would be like, all right, maybe I'd do it. But the idea of just like, we're just gonna shock them and it's gonna get worse and worse and worse, I'd be like, that's fucking shitty. And it's like, to teach them what? Like, if you're teaching them to, like, sit or do something like,
but that's the thing.
Stand
it's
over,
like, they're not. That wasn't the true experiment. But all these psychology students believed that was the experiment. But the real experiment was, how far will they go? Will they keep shocking the puppy? If it goes up to like 170 volts and shit like that. I'd have gotten in that room and been like, look, if you teach this puppy to jerk off, like I saw on the fucking red tube,
that's the end result.
I will shock the puppy because I want to see that live and in person. Speaking of dogs, there was an experiment called Demikov's two-headed dogs. In 1954, Vladimir Demikov shocked the world by unveiling a surgically created monstrosity, a two-headed dog. He created the creature in a lab on the outskirts of Moscow by grafting the head, shoulders, and front legs of a puppy, always fucking with the puppies, onto the neck of a mature German shepherd. Demikov paraded the dog before reporters from around the world. Journalists gasped as both heads simultaneously lapped at bowls of milk, and then cringed as the milk from the puppy's head dribbled out the unconnected stump of its esophageal tube. So he sewed a fucking another dog to a dog to another dog with its tube hanging out, so even though it was like fucking eaten, it was just falling out on the fucking floor and shit like that. The Soviet Union proudly boasted that the dog was proof of their nation's medical preeminence. Can you imagine?
We're the most fucked up people in the country. Well,
you think you guys are weird? Check this out. Demikov, bring out the two-headed dog.
Next, we're going to have a two-ass dog. Watch him shit.
Over the course of the next 15 years, Demikov created a total of 20 of his two-headed dogs. None of them lived very long, as they inevitably succumbed to problems of tissue rejection. The record was a month. For a month, this fucking monster lived. This poor two-headed fucking dog. Demikov explained that the dogs were part of a continuing series of experiments and surgical techniques, with his ultimate goal being to learn how to perform a human heart and lung transplant. Another surgeon beat him to it, Dr. Christian Barnard, in 1967, but Demikov is widely credited with paving the way for heart transplants. So that's the reason he started selling dogs together.
Isn't it funny where it's like, why don't you just take the heart out of one dog?
They're like, wait, what's this proof? They're like, that one day we'll be able to put another guy's heart in another dude. It's like, what the fuck's that have to do with sewing a puppy to a dog's back? Like shouldn't you be working with
fucking thing?
He's like, it's fucked up, right? It'll never look like that when we transplant a heart. I'm basically conditioning you to see the most horrible things, so that when we open up a man's chest cavity and put a different heart in him, it won't seem so bad. What could be more horrific than creating a two-headed dog? What about keeping the severed head of a dog alive apart from its body? That was the experiment. Ever since the carnage of the French Revolution, people were wondering, hey man, when the guillotine cuts a head off, what the fuck? How long does the head live? Soviet physician, another fucking Ruski, Soviet physician Sergei Brunkohonka, I can't even say his name. Sergei, let's call him Serge. Developed, hey Serge, cut that dog's head off, see if it lives. All right, awesome. Developed a primitive heart-lung machine he called an autojector, and with his device he succeeded in keeping the severed head of a dog alive. He displayed one of his living dog's heads in 1928 before an international audience of scientists at the Third Congress of Physiologists of the USSR. To prove that the head lying on the table really was alive, he showed that it reacted to stimuli. Sergei would bang a hammer on the table, and the head flinched. He shone a light in its eye, and the eyes blinked. He even fed the head a piece of cheese, which promptly popped out of the esophageal tube on the other end. Whenever they do these dog experiments, they always leave the esophageal tube hanging out because they're like, this will really fuck with their heads if they see something fall out. Brunkov or Sergei's severed dog head became the talk of Europe and inspired the playwright George Bernard Shaw to muse. I am even tempted to have my own head cut off so that I can continue to dictate plays and books without being bothered by illness, without having to dress and undress, without having to eat, without having anything else to do other than to produce masterpieces of dramatic art and literature.
I'm to flinch when people hit tables.
Totally. Like, what are you doing with that hammer, man?
What are you going to do now, George?
There's another one called the human-ape hybrid. This one's not that interesting.
Do you think that's why the Russians are finally like, let's throw dogs a bone and send one to space?
Yeah, it's like, we got to lionize one, make him a hero, jet him into fucking space. Then when he gets back, sew him to another fucking dog and cut his fucking head off and make it live.